Have you ever wondered if a single act of kindness, just one selfless decision, could change your entire life? What if giving away your last dollar became the very moment that turned everything around? Welcome back to Swift Tale, the place where real stories meet heart, emotion, and inspiration. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story might just remind you that miracles don't always come from wealth or power. Sometimes they come from compassion when it costs the most. Today, we'll dive into the remarkable story of a woman named Angela, a hard-working black woman who had nothing left but faith. Life had tested her again and again, bills piling up, an empty wallet, and a future clouded by uncertainty. But one ordinary afternoon at a gas station, Angela made a choice that would change her life forever. She used her last dollar, money meant for her and her daughter, to help a stranger stranded on the side of the road. That stranger, covered in dust and leather, seemed like just another biker passing through town. But what Angela didn't know was that behind the helmet and worn jacket stood a man whose wealth could move mountains, a billionaire hiding from his own life, lost and bitter from betrayal and loneliness. In that brief moment, two worlds collided, one of struggle and sacrifice, the other of privilege and emptiness. Angela didn't help him because of who he was. She helped because that's who she was. And sometimes, life has a mysterious way of rewarding those who give without expecting anything in return. Because the very next day, just as Angela was trying to figure out how to stretch what little she had left, there was an unexpected knock at her door, and standing there was the same man she had helped, but this time dressed not as a biker, but as a billionaire. This story matters because it's more than a tale of luck or charity. It's about faith, grace, and the unseen power of doing good even when the world gives you every reason not to. In a time where people often look out only for themselves, Angela's story reminds us that real wealth lies not in money, but in kindness. It's a story that will make you question what you would do if faced with the same choice, and it might just renew your belief that compassion still exists. So settle in, because over the next few minutes, you're going to witness how one woman's last act of generosity rippled through fate itself and brought her face to face with a miracle she never saw coming. This is Black Woman Used Her Last Dollar to Pay Gas for a Biker. Next day, Billionaire knocked on her door. Angela sat at the edge of her bed that morning, staring at a small stack of unpaid bills spread out across her nightstand. The numbers blurred together, each one reminding her of how hard life had become. The hum of her old refrigerator echoed through the tiny apartment, the kind of sound that filled silence when there was nothing left to say. Her daughter, Maya, only 8 years old, slept soundly in the next room, her small chest rising and falling with the kind of peace only children knew. Angela smiled faintly, but her heart was heavy. She had promised Maya a better life, one filled with laughter and stability. Yet, as the rent deadline crept closer and her paycheck seemed smaller each month, that promise felt harder and harder to keep. Angela worked long shifts at a local diner, 10 hours a day serving customers who barely looked up when she refilled their coffee. The tips were inconsistent, the hours exhausting, and the appreciation non-existent. Still, she showed up every day because quitting wasn't an option. She often told herself, maybe next week will be better. But weeks turned into months, and the only thing that grew was the pile of overdue notices on her kitchen table. The nights were the hardest. When Maya was asleep, Angela would sit by the window with a worn notebook, scribbling down numbers, trying to make the math work, how to stretch $50 into groceries, rent, and gas. She'd whisper small prayers under her breath, not asking for luxury, just enough strength to make it through another day. Some nights she cried silently, wiping her tears quickly so Maya would never see. Because in Angela's eyes, a mother's strength was measured not by how much she had, but by how much she gave, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Her car was old, a hand-me-down from her late brother. It coughed and sputtered every time she turned the key, but it was all she had. And with every rattle of the engine, she silently prayed it would get her through another week. Gas prices had risen, and every dollar mattered. Still, Angela carried herself with quiet dignity. At church on Sundays, she'd greet everyone with a warm smile, hiding the fatigue in her eyes. People saw her kindness, but few knew the battles she fought when she went home. There was something unshakable about her faith, though. Despite the hardship, she believed in something greater, believed that life had a way of turning pain into purpose. God doesn't forget those who do right, she'd remind herself each morning before heading to work. And though her clothes were worn and her shoes tired, her heart remained strong. She never let bitterness take root, even when life seemed unfair. Angela's story wasn't one of hopelessness, it was one of resilience. Each challenge built her character, each setback taught her patience, and even though she didn't know it yet, the universe had already begun to move in her favor. A single moment was coming, one simple decision at a gas station, that would turn her struggle into a story the world would never forget. But on this day, she had no idea that destiny was quietly watching her, waiting for her next act of kindness to unfold. The sun was dipping low behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet, as Angela pulled her worn-out car into the old gas station on the edge of town. The open sign flickered weakly, the kind of place that had seen better days. She parked near the last pump, opened her purse, and sighed as she looked at the few crumpled bills inside. It wasn't much, just enough to buy a couple gallons of gas and maybe a loaf of bread for dinner. She whispered softly, "Lord, just let this be enough," before stepping out into the evening breeze. As she began filling her tank, the faint rumble of a motorcycle broke the quiet. Angela turned her head and saw a man on a black Harley roll slowly into the lot. He wore a dusty leather jacket, his face shadowed beneath a helmet, and his entire posture spoke of exhaustion. The bike sputtered, coughed, then went silent. The man kicked the ground in frustration and muttered something under his breath. Angela noticed the defeated slump of his shoulders. She recognized that kind of weariness. The kind that didn't come just from a long ride, but from carrying the weight of something heavy inside. He walked toward the convenience store, only to stop halfway, patting his pockets with growing anxiety. She could tell immediately he was out of gas and out of cash. The cashier, a young kid with headphones dangling from his neck, barely looked up when the man asked, "You got an ATM?" The reply came lazily, "It's down, has been for days." The biker nodded silently, looked back at his empty tank and sighed. Angela stood there, her hands still on the pump, watching him. For a moment, she thought about minding her own business. After all, she had problems of her own, but something inside her, a quiet voice she'd learned never to ignore, told her to act. She hesitated, then called out softly, "Hey, you okay?" The biker looked up, surprised that anyone even noticed him. "Yeah," he said after a moment, trying to sound casual, "just ran out of gas. Guess I'll figure it out." His voice carried a mix of weariness and pride, the kind that refused help even when it was needed. Angela glanced at her gas meter, knowing she barely had enough for herself, but she smiled faintly and said, "Hold on a sec." She opened her purse again, pulled out her last dollar bill, creased, faded, and nearly torn. It was supposed to be her grocery money, but without thinking twice, she walked toward him and said, "Here, it's not much, but it'll get you going." The man stared at her, stunned. "Ma'am, I can't take that," he said, shaking his head. "You don't even know me." Angela's smile didn't waver. "You don't have to know someone to help them. Just promise me you'll pay it forward someday." For a long moment, he didn't speak. His gloved hands trembled slightly as he accepted the bill. There was something about her eyes, kind, steady, and unguarded, that left him speechless. "Thank you," he finally managed to say, his voice breaking just a little. Angela simply nodded. "Safe travels," she said, before returning to her car. As she drove off, her gas gauge barely above empty, the biker stood there, holding that single dollar in his hand like it was worth a fortune. He'd met countless people in his life, businessmen, executives, even politicians, but never someone who gave without expectation, especially when they had so little to give. That night, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the biker filled his tank using the woman's dollar and rode off into the darkness, unaware that this brief encounter had already begun to change both their lives forever. The night air was cool as the biker sped down the empty highway, the hum of his Harley echoing across the open road. But this time, something felt different. The wind whipped against his face, yet all he could feel was the warmth of a stranger's kindness still lingering in his chest. That woman, Angela, her face wouldn't leave his mind. He'd seen countless acts of greed and selfishness in his lifetime, but what she did, giving her last dollar to a man she didn't even know, struck him harder than anything else ever had. He slowed the bike near a quiet overlook, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Removing his helmet, he took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. Beneath the dust and grime, his real identity waited to be remembered: Ethan Cross, a billionaire CEO who had once been hailed as a genius entrepreneur. The world saw him as unstoppable, the kind of man who built empires and moved markets with a single decision. But what they didn't see was the toll it took, the betrayals, the lawsuits, the so-called friends who vanished when the spotlight dimmed. A year ago, his life had imploded. A business partner he trusted had stolen millions, leaving his company on the brink of collapse. The media turned him into a villain, headlines calling him corrupt, greedy, and heartless. Even worse, his own family, his wife and son, walked away, unable to handle the public shame. Ethan had tried to drown his pain in luxury and liquor, but nothing numbed the ache of being alone. So he left it all behind, the mansion, the boardrooms, the money, and hit the road in disguise, searching for something he couldn't name. He thought he'd seen it all, until that woman looked at him, not as a billionaire, not as a broken man, but simply as someone who needed help. He pulled the wrinkled dollar bill from his pocket, staring at it under the faint glow of the streetlight. It was nothing more than paper, but to him it felt like redemption. "She didn't even know me," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. And still she gave everything she had. Ethan hadn't prayed in years, but in that moment his heart spoke a quiet prayer of gratitude for her, for the reminder that goodness still existed in the world. He sat there for hours, watching the stars appear one by one, lost in thought. For the first time in a long time, he felt a stirring of hope, a spark of purpose. That single act of kindness had done something no amount of money ever could. It made him feel human again. He thought about the foundation he had once dreamed of starting, one that would help struggling families get back on their feet. Somewhere along the way, ambition had buried compassion, but Angela's gesture had unearthed it once more. By the time the first light of dawn touched the sky, Ethan made up his mind. He couldn't just ride away and forget her. He needed to find that woman again, not just to thank her, but to show her what her kindness had awakened in him. She had given her last dollar, but she had also given him something far greater, a reason to believe again. He turned the key, the Harley roared to life, and he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I find her." The engine's growl filled the morning air as he sped toward the rising sun, carrying with him a renewed heart and a purpose he hadn't felt in years. That evening, the world outside was calm, but inside Angela's heart, a quiet storm brewed. Her car barely made it home, the gas needle trembling just above empty. As she parked in front of her small apartment complex, the streetlights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. She sat there for a moment in silence, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. The image of the biker lingered in her mind, the tired look in his eyes, the surprise when she handed him her last dollar. When she stepped inside, the familiar scent of warm soup filled the air. Her daughter Maya had set the table the way she always did, 2 chipped plates, 2 mismatched cups, and a folded napkin at each place. "You're home, Mommy," Maya said, running to hug her. Angela smiled, kneeling to wrap her arms around her little girl. For a moment, all the weight on her shoulders melted away. "Of course, baby," she whispered, brushing a curl from Maya's forehead. "Mommy's always coming home." They sat together and ate quietly. The meal was simple, a can of soup stretched with a handful of noodles, but Angela made sure it felt like a feast. Maya chattered about school, her excitement filling the small kitchen. Angela laughed, nodding along, though her mind kept drifting back to the gas station. When Maya asked if they could go to the park that weekend, Angela hesitated before saying softly, "We'll see, sweetheart." Deep down, she knew there wasn't enough gas to make the trip. Later that night, after putting Maya to bed, Angela stood by the window, staring at the dim lights of the city. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the soft ticking of the wall clock. She thought about the dollar she had given away, her last dollar. Rationally, it didn't make sense. That money could have covered a small meal tomorrow or a few extra miles to work, but somehow she didn't regret it. In her heart, she felt peace. Maybe, she whispered to herself, maybe it was a test. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. "When you give, you don't lose, you plant a seed." Angela smiled faintly. She wanted to believe that kindness always came back, even if not right away. She walked over to Maya's room, kissed her forehead, and pulled the blanket tighter around her. The little girl stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Mommy loves helping people." Tears welled in Angela's eyes. She turned off the light and stood there for a long time, her silhouette bathed in the glow of the street lamp outside. She didn't have much to give, not money, not luxury, but what she did have was a heart that refused to turn cold, no matter how hard life had been. When she finally went to bed, she prayed quietly, thanking God for the strength to do what felt right. She asked not for riches, but for a sign, a small reassurance that her faith still mattered. The world outside was silent, the air still. And as Angela drifted to sleep, she couldn't have known that somewhere out there, a man on a motorcycle was wide awake, his mind consumed with thoughts of her, and that her prayer, whispered in the quiet of the night, was already on its way to being answered. The morning sun broke gently over the city skyline as Ethan Cross sat in a small roadside diner, his leather jacket folded neatly beside him. His untouched coffee had gone cold. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business meetings, stock reports, or the next acquisition. He was thinking about her, that woman at the gas station, the one who had given away her last dollar without hesitation, not knowing who he really was. Her kindness had unsettled him in the best way possible. It wasn't just what she did, it was why she did it. Ethan had met countless people who smiled to get close to his wealth, who spoke kindly to gain favor. But this woman, Angela, had looked at him like a human being, not a man with a billion-dollar fortune. She didn't see a headline or a scandal. She saw a stranger in need, and that changed everything. He leaned back in his seat, watching people come and go, ordinary people, a mother juggling her kids and groceries, a truck driver rubbing his tired eyes before heading back on the road, a waitress wiping down a table with a forced smile. They all looked so real, so alive. And for the first time in years, Ethan envied them, their struggles, their authenticity, their simple faith in tomorrow. He pulled the wrinkled dollar bill from his pocket again. It was creased and worn, yet it felt heavier than gold. He thought about how he'd lost touch with what mattered most. His success had isolated him. His empire had made him powerful, but empty. All the money in the world couldn't buy what that one act of compassion had given him, peace. Ethan paid his bill, left a generous tip, and stepped outside. The morning breeze carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. He climbed onto his bike, turned the key, and whispered to himself, "It's time." His journey that day wasn't measured in miles but in meaning. He rode back toward the old gas station, the same one where his life had shifted overnight. The same cashier was behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. Ethan removed his helmet and asked calmly, "Do you remember a woman who helped a biker here yesterday?" The boy squinted, then nodded. "Yeah, lady in an old blue car. Lives over by Pine Street, I think. Single mom, she's in here sometimes." Ethan smiled faintly, thanked him, and headed out. Pine Street, a modest neighborhood lined with small, agging houses and overgrown yards. It wasn't where billionaires went, but that's exactly why he was there. Because that street, that woman, represented everything he had lost: humility, humanity, and heart. As he parked near a faded yellow building, he hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her or make her feel small. He didn't even want her to know who he was at first. He simply wanted to thank her. But as he stood there, holding that dollar bill in his hand, he realized something deeper. He didn't just owe her gratitude, he owed her change. Real change. For years, Ethan had talked about philanthropy, about giving back, but it had always been numbers on a spreadsheet, not faces in his life. Angela had reminded him that compassion wasn't a transaction, it was a connection. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan knew exactly what he needed to do. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his personal assistant, a woman named Clara who hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Clara," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in months, "I want you to set up a meeting with my board. Tell them we're restructuring the foundation." There was silence on the line. "Sir," Clara replied, "does that mean you're coming back?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, but not the same way I left." He hung up, took one last look at the little neighborhood, and said quietly, "You gave me back more than I can ever repay, Angela. Now it's my turn." He got back on his bike, the engine roaring to life with purpose. This time, every turn of the wheel brought him closer to redemption and to the woman whose selfless act had breathed humanity back into his soul. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would go to her door. The next morning dawned soft and gray, the kind of morning that felt heavy with meaning, like the world was holding its breath. Angela stood by the small window of her kitchen, the smell of instant coffee and toasted bread filling the air. She was tired but peaceful. The memory of the biker from the day before still lingered in her mind. Something about his eyes, the emptiness, the pain, had haunted her all night. She hoped, wherever he was, he'd found his way. She looked down at her near-empty wallet and sighed. Rent was due in 3 days, and she barely had enough for groceries. But even in her struggle, Angela whispered a small prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me enough to help someone yesterday. Even if it was my last dollar, it felt right." Just as she placed her mug in the sink, a sound echoed through the small apartment: knock, knock, knock. Firm, deliberate. Her heart jumped. She wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping her hands on her apron, she moved toward the door, cautious but curious. When she opened it, she froze. Standing before her was the same man from the gas station, but this time he wasn't wearing his worn biker jacket or carrying the look of a lost soul. His hair was neatly combed, his clothes tailored, and behind him sat a gleaming black car with tinted windows. He looked powerful, confident, different. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I'm sorry to bother you so early." Angela blinked, unsure what to say. "You're the man from yesterday, aren't you? The one whose bike ran out of gas." He smiled a little sheepishly. "Yes, that was me, and I've been looking for you." Her confusion deepened. "Looking for me? Why?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out the same crumpled dollar bill she had handed him the day before. "Because this," he said, holding it up gently, "changed everything." Angela frowned slightly. "It was just $1. You don't have to." "No," he interrupted softly. "It wasn't just $1. It was faith. It was kindness when I didn't deserve any. You gave me hope when I'd lost it completely. You reminded me what humanity feels like." She stood there, stunned. "I don't understand." He took a breath, as if preparing to share something he hadn't told anyone in years. "My name is Ethan Cross," he said slowly. "I own Cross Industries." Angela's eyes widened. The name sounded familiar. It was on billboards, news headlines, corporate buildings downtown. "Wait, you're that Ethan Cross?" He nodded, almost embarrassed. "Yes, but yesterday I wasn't a billionaire. I was just a man ready to give up. I took that ride thinking I might not come back. My wealth, my success, none of it mattered anymore. I had no reason left to live. But then you appeared, a stranger. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. Yet you gave your last dollar just so I could keep going." Angela's eyes filled with tears. I was just trying to help. I didn't think." "That's the thing," he said, stepping closer. "You didn't think about what you'd lose. You acted from the heart, and that act pulled me back from a place darker than I can describe." He reached into his coat pocket again, and this time handed her a white envelope. "Inside is my way of saying thank you. It's not charity, it's gratitude. Open it when you're ready." Angela hesitated, her trembling fingers accepting the envelope. "You really don't have to." He smiled gently. "I already did. And one more thing," he added, glancing at the small apartment behind her. "I'd like to talk to you about something bigger than both of us, but only if you'll let me." She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. "Okay, would you like to come in?" He stepped inside, looking around the modest home. The walls were worn but filled with warmth, photos of Angela and her late mother, a small Bible on the table, a half-done jigsaw puzzle. It was humble, but it was alive. "This," Ethan said softly, "is what I've been missing. Real life, real people." Angela offered him coffee, and they sat across from each other at her tiny kitchen table. For the first time in years, Ethan spoke freely about his success, his loneliness, and how he'd lost himself somewhere along the climb. And Angela listened, not as someone impressed by his money, but as someone who cared about his soul. Hours passed like minutes. When Ethan finally left, the world outside seemed brighter. He promised he'd return, not for business, not for an obligation, but because he'd found something genuine. As Angela watched him drive away, she finally looked down at the envelope in her hands. Her heart pounded as she opened it, and what she found inside made her knees go weak. It wasn't just money, it was a letter, and what it said would change her life forever. Angela stood frozen in the doorway long after Ethan's car disappeared down the street. The envelope in her trembling hands felt heavier than paper. It felt like destiny. Her breath came uneven as she turned it over, noticing the neat handwriting on the front. "For the woman who reminded me what life is worth." Her fingers hesitated at the seal. For a long moment, she just stared at it, unsure whether she should open it. She had never been given anything by someone like him, a man of wealth, influence, and power. Part of her was afraid to know what was inside, afraid it would make her feel small or worse, indebted. But another part of her whispered that this was different. This wasn't pity. This was purpose. Finally, she tore it open. Inside, there was a folded letter and a crisp white check. Her eyes flicked first to the numbers, and her knees nearly gave out. The check was written for $250,000. For a woman who had barely managed to pay rent each month, it didn't feel real. The edges of her vision blurred as she struggled to breathe. This can't be, she whispered. This has to be a mistake. With shaking hands, she unfolded the letter. Angela. Yesterday I was ready to end my life. I thought I had everything a man could want, yet inside I was empty. You didn't know me, and yet you gave me something no amount of money could buy: compassion. You didn't ask for my name, my story, or what I could offer you in return. You simply gave, and that single act stopped me from doing something irreversible. This check is not a payment. It's a symbol. I want you to use it however your heart leads, to rebuild your life, to chase a dream, or to help others the way you helped me. But beyond this, I want you to know something more important. You changed me. Starting today, I'm launching a new foundation, the Angela Hope Initiative. Its mission will be simple: to help people in crisis, to remind them that one act of kindness can change everything. I'd be honored if you would join me as a partner to help lead and guide it. You have something money can't buy: empathy, and I need your heart more than your experience. Thank you for saving a life you didn't even know you were saving. Ethan Cross. Tears streamed down Angela's cheeks as she clutched the letter to her chest. Every word felt like sunlight breaking through years of clouds. She thought of her late mother, who used to tell her, "When you give with a pure heart, God will return it in ways you can't imagine." Now, those words rang truer than ever. She sat down at her small kitchen table, staring at the check through her tears. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped by her circumstances. She felt seen, she felt valued, but more than that, she felt a new sense of purpose stirring deep inside her. Angela wasn't thinking about the money, she was thinking about the mission. A foundation that could help others, that could feed hungry children, pay off hospital bills, or give struggling families a fresh start. She realized that Ethan hadn't just given her a gift, he had given her a calling. As the day turned into night, she wrote a letter back to him. "Dear Ethan, you said I reminded you what life is worth. But truth be told, you reminded me too that kindness doesn't end when you give it. It grows, it multiplies. You don't owe me anything, but I'll accept your offer on one condition: that we use this gift not for ourselves, but for everyone who's forgotten what hope feels like. If this is the beginning of something good, let's make it count. Angela." The next morning, she mailed the letter and stood by her window, watching the sunrise with a renewed heart. It felt like a new chapter had begun, not just for her, but for both of them. Days later, a sleek car returned to her street. This time, Ethan wasn't alone. He brought a small team of advisors and a camera crew, not for publicity, but to document the first official day of the Angela Hope Initiative. When he saw her again, his eyes lit up. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes," he said softly. Angela smiled, holding up the letter she'd written. "How could I say no to hope?" They shook hands, a billionaire and a woman who had once spent her last dollar to help a stranger. And in that moment, two very different lives merged into one purpose: to bring kindness back into a world that had forgotten it. Neither of them could have known that within a year, the foundation would change thousands of lives, or that their story would inspire millions around the world. But for now, in that small neighborhood, with the scent of fresh rain in the air, a miracle had already begun. The days that followed marked a turning point neither Angela nor Ethan could have imagined. The Angela Hope Initiative officially launched just 3 weeks after that morning knock on her door. What started as a conversation at her modest kitchen table quickly evolved into a movement that reached beyond neighborhoods, cities, and even countries. Ethan, once hidden behind corporate walls and layers of isolation, was now a man reborn. His billion-dollar empire had once been built on strategy and ambition, Now, it was powered by compassion, but he often reminded people that the real visionary wasn't him. It all started, he'd say during interviews, with a woman who gave away her last dollar and didn't even ask for my name. Angela, though initially shy in front of the cameras, became the heartbeat of the foundation. Her story spread like wildfire. News outlets called her the woman who saved a billionaire, but she always corrected them. No, she'd say with a humble smile, I didn't save him, kindness did. Every morning, she and Ethan met in the foundation's new office, a repurposed community center just a few blocks from her old apartment. She refused to move uptown despite Ethan offering her anything she wanted. The people I'm trying to help live here, she'd say, so this is where I belong. Together, they designed programs that helped struggling families pay for rent, sent kids to college, and built local shelters for veterans. They even launched a Dollar of Hope campaign, encouraging people across the world to give just $1 to someone in need, just as Angela had done that day. The response was overwhelming. Within months, the campaign went viral. Millions joined in sharing their stories online, showing how $1 had sparked countless acts of kindness. It was as if the world had been waiting for a reminder that compassion still mattered. But it wasn't all easy. The more attention they received, the more critics appeared. Some accused Ethan of using the foundation as a publicity stunt. Others claimed Angela was just a symbol to make him look good. But instead of letting the negativity crush them, they faced it head-on, together. One evening, as they stood overlooking the city from the foundation's rooftop, Angela turned to Ethan and said, "You know, people will always have something to say. But as long as one person sleeps better tonight because of what we're doing, it's worth it." Ethan smiled. "You've become my compass, Angela. You remind me why I started all this." She laughed softly. "You didn't start it, Ethan. You just chose to listen when life gave you a second chance." Under the golden hue of the setting sun, their friendship deepened into something profound, not romance, but something purer. A partnership built on gratitude, faith, and the shared belief that one act of love could ripple into eternity. Months passed, and Angela's life changed in ways she never thought possible. Her small apartment was now filled with photos of families the foundation had helped, a mother reunited with her children, an elderly man finally getting the surgery he couldn't afford, a young student holding her college acceptance letter with tears of joy. Every image was a reminder of what kindness could do when multiplied. Ethan often joked that he had spent billions chasing the feeling that one woman's $1 had given him. "All my life," he said during a televised interview, "I thought money was power, but Angela taught me that the real power is love in action." Soon, invitations came from around the world, conferences, universities, talk shows. But the moment that defined them came when the United Nations invited Angela and Ethan to speak about global poverty and human empathy. Standing before leaders from every corner of the world, Angela told her story. Her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't give my last dollar expecting anything in return. I just couldn't watch someone suffer. But what that man taught me, what life taught me, is that kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back, often when you least expect it." The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Even Ethan, a man once too proud to cry, felt tears in his eyes. As they left the stage, he whispered, "You didn't just change my life, Angela. You changed the world." She smiled, glancing up at the bright lights of the auditorium. "No, Ethan, we did, together." And for a moment, it was clear two people who couldn't have been more different had become instruments of the same song, the melody of hope echoing across the hearts of millions. Years later, the world still spoke about the Angela Hope Initiative, a foundation that began with a single act of generosity, one woman, $1, and one moment that changed everything. But for Angela and Ethan, it was never about headlines, awards, or recognition. It was about humanity. About remembering that even in a world filled with division and struggle, kindness remained the one language everyone understood. Angela never forgot where she came from. Though she now worked beside world leaders and appeared on magazine covers, she still lived simply, humbly. She often returned to that same gas station, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. Sometimes she'd quietly pay for a stranger's fuel just like she did years ago. And every time she did, she'd smile softly and whisper to herself, "Hope starts small." Ethan, on the other hand, had become a different man altogether. The weight he once carried, the emptiness that nearly consumed him, had been replaced by purpose. His company now funded countless humanitarian projects, and his foundation grew stronger each year. But whenever reporters asked what inspired his transformation, his answer never changed. "It wasn't a boardroom or a business deal," he'd say. "It was a woman who gave away her last dollar because she still believed in good." Together, Ethan and Angela built a legacy that outlived them both. Schools bore her name, hospitals carried his. But the real legacy wasn't made of concrete and glass. It was built in the hearts of people who chose kindness over indifference, compassion over convenience. Angela often told her team, "We can't save the whole world, but we can change one life at a time, and that's how the world changes." Those words became the foundation's motto, painted across every building they opened. As years passed, the story of how they met became something of a legend. It was told in classrooms, shared in sermons, and passed through generations. Parents told their children about the black woman who used her last dollar to help a stranger, and how that stranger turned out to be a billionaire who rediscovered his purpose through her kindness. But if you had asked Angela what she thought about it all, she would have simply smiled and said, "I didn't change a billionaire's life. I just did what was right." And maybe that's the truth that the world needed to hear most, that kindness doesn't require wealth, fame, or perfect timing. It only requires a willing heart. Camera pans out softly, piano music fades in. So as we close this story tonight, let's take a moment to ask ourselves, what would happen if we all gave just a little more kindness, even when we have so little to give? Wouldn't the world begin to heal, one act of love at a time? Because sometimes it doesn't take a miracle to change someone's life, it just takes you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Swift Tale for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters. And before you go, drop a comment below. Tell us, what's one act of kindness you'll do this week? You never know whose life it might change. Until next time, this is Swift Tale, where every story reminds you kindness still wins.